COVID-19 has been disastrous for our economy and our productivity.
But it has caused us to reset, rethink, and innovate.
Productivity Awareness Week 2020 will focus on building collective resilience in tourism, infrastructure, and the financial sector.
Rethink our approach to the agriculture, manufacturing, and the health sector.
It calls for innovation in education and taking advantage of opportunities in the digital economy.
Telework for greater resilience and productivity.
Join the discussions during Productivity Awareness Week from October 12th to the 16th.
Under the theme, Building Resilience Through Collective Action.
Reset.
Rethink.
Innovate.
Join the discussions live on Facebook at St. Lucia, NCPC, the National Competitiveness and Productivity Council, embracing excellence.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Productivity Awareness Week. And on behalf of the National Competitiveness and Productivity Council, the NCPC, I welcome you here this morning. We are going to have a panel discussion this morning as part of the week's activities. The theme for this week is Building Resilience Through Collective Action. Reset, Rethink, Innovate. Our panel discussion this morning, our topic is the education system, gaps, weaknesses, opportunities during and post-COVID-19. And we have with us today a diverse panel, and as a result, I know we'll have quite a lively discussion. Let me introduce the members of the panel. We have Dr. Keith Nurse, principal of the Sir Arthur Lewis Community College. Dr. Nurse was the director of the Sridhar Ramphal Center for International Trade Law, Policy and Services at the University of the West Indies, Cave Hill campus, and has been a consultant to governments, NGOs, and international, regionals, and national agencies in the Caribbean, Africa, North America, and in Europe. Welcome, Dr. Nurse. Mr. Cyrus Sipal, Education Officer for District 1. His passion and focus of studies has been in education leadership and youth development. Welcome, sir. We have Mr. Kurt Harris. He is a director for the Vaughan Lewis Institute for Research and Innovation, the former dean of the Division of Education and Management Studies, and currently with the duties of internalization for the Sir Arthur Lewis Community College. Welcome, sir. We have Ms. Noella Richardson, a teacher from the Dame Perlette Louise Primary School, and she was one of the main contributors in the preparation as well as the teaching of the territorial program, which was produced by the Ministry of Education during the lockdown. She hopes that the future holds one where all schools will be able to accommodate all challenged. Welcome, Miss. And we have Miss Caitlin Samuel, the Vice President of the National Students' Council and former student of the Sir Arthur Lewis Community College. Welcome. As I said, a very diverse panel with different points of view. So to begin our discussion, we're going to give each panelist an opportunity to share their initial thoughts on the theme for today. Let me repeat the theme. It is the education system, gaps, weaknesses, opportunities during and post-COVID-19. Now, let me just, at this moment, let you know that I know some of you are with us live on NTN. We are also on NTN and on the NCPC's Facebook and YouTube pages. So you can, of course, follow us on any medium that best suits you. And of course, please write in your comments. We will be looking at, especially the Facebook page, to see what comments you have contributed. And as we can, we will share those with our panelists. So, I think we shall start with the panelists I introduced last. So we'll start with you, ma'am. Turn it on, I think it's...
Hi, good morning. She introduced me, Caitlin Samuel. I'm the Vice President of the National Students Council and also the Vice President of Do Something Different Foundation. And the theme, over the past few months, we have seen that COVID has tremendously impacted our education system. And it has initiated a change from the physical classroom to a virtual learning environment, allowing both students and teachers to resort to remote learning and the use of technology. As a student-led organization, the National Student Council focuses on ensuring that students are represented and the issues being faced by students is addressed accordingly. Process and product innovations refer to new technologies and techniques which have been used to assist students to learn during this pandemic. It's been very difficult for our students to grasp such change in such a short period of time, and it's difficult considering the conditions, and some students are not able to grasp like others. So I believe that the Ministry of Education has provided quite a bit of opportunities and assisted the students in all ways to ensure that no student is left behind. Thank you.
Thank you, Miss. Miss Richardson.
Hi, good morning. My name is Noella Richardson, and I'm a teacher at the Dame Paulette Louise Primary School. And in keeping with the theme for today, COVID has been a game changer and also an eye-opener to everyone. With regards to education, I would say a game changer in the fact that we always saw school as book, board, and teacher. When COVID came around, we had to introduce technology, which should have been incorporated long before. But now that it came about, teachers can use it in between their classes, and we could begin introducing students to the technological fields, because we don't have to wait for the future for us to fully divert to technology. Most schools from higher levels, tertiary and beyond, have already diverged into the technological fields. But the primary school students, they're young, they're into technology. However, they only see these gadgets and everything to do with technology as fun. Whereas it could be fun and it could be educational. So I see that COVID has opened our eyes, and it has also brought out the innovative teachers that we have. Instead of just coming lackadaisical, you know the work in your head. Now we have to come up with creative styles to reach out to students. And right now, because of all of that, we are not only reaching out to students, we are reaching out to parents. We're basically teaching everybody how to teach those students, how to cope with them, because we have been out of school for about 5 months. Some students were unable to attend classes online due to the fact that they did not have a device or there was no internet, or also parents who are at work, they were not able to assist those students. And even those who were able to attend the online classes, it was a big distraction to them. It was a new thing. They were not being monitored. A parent sat by them, and during the classes, the parents would ensure that they were attentive, they were understanding what was going on. It was just like, it was a big shock to us. We tried to work with it. We did our best with it. However, there were many challenges faced with this COVID-19.
Thank you, Miss. Mr. Harris?
Morning. Our assessment of the impact that COVID has had on the education system may take a little bit of a different twist. One of the issues that we think that has come about is the failure to recognize the value of the school as a social safety net. And what we are recognizing is that the school really has a major socio-psychological impact and a refuge for a lot of students. There are a lot of young persons right now who, because of the fact that they're in the digital age and they're staying at home and they're not going to school, that right now they are spending 7 days a week with their abuser, with their molester. And that refuge called a school is closed. There are children who have a friend who brings a bread to school for them every day. So that meal that they get every day is lost because we in this digital platform that for some comes across as a panacea. There are those who have none of those issues at home, but they're the middle child. And for those of us who come from big families, sometimes the middle children are the forgotten children. And the love and the comfort that they get is from going to school, where they have their friends and somebody who cares about them and would talk to them. Unlike what they get at home, they feel that comfort at home. And COVID has now placed them in that situation whereby those students must remain at home for social distancing and all of those issues. And the value of the school plant as that social safety net has been forgotten because we have never viewed the school plant as a safety net for a lot of young persons. You also have the fact that some persons don't get motivation at home. They get motivation from coming to school and somebody saying, boy, you know, you're really good at sports, you're really good. And they get this motivation from other persons looking up to them for what they are good at. Right now, they're in a digital environment where they may not receive that sort of motivation to move on. There's also the impact of blue light burnout. This constant watching of the screen creates burnout where persons may not want to engage in the classroom like many persons think. So we've seen the move, the quick and rapid move into the digital environment and taking persons away from the classroom, which without looking at, and we see that as a gap, the social and the psychosocial impact that this is having, and how are we dealing and working with our students to be able to cope with the loss of that safety net called the school. There are many students who look forward to going to school to escape a lot of those issues that I've just outlined. But now we are telling them that you can only come to school twice a week to be safe, or maybe 3 times, and in some cases, none at all. And this is something that ranges from the bottom of the school system in the primary school all the way up to the tertiary level where school and that school plant is a safety net. There's also the economic impact of the education sector, that we have undervalued the economic impact of the education sector. Around every single school in St. Lucia, there are a minimum of 3 vendors selling around that school. South Louis has 7. All of them have lost their employment as a result of everybody being at home and online. These are 7 families that have been impacted by moving into a digital world. So the economic impact of school and school not happening is having a major impact, and those students are going to school. So the source of income to go to school, to buy the device, to do the learning has been taken away by moving into the digital world. And have we considered and looked at that economic impact? Education has impact also on the transportation sector. The transportation sector takes a major hit every time that school is closed. So when you take out all of those students out of the transportation sector, that is a major economic backlash. And I don't think we've done a solid enough analysis as to the impact of the education sector on our economic climate, because there is a microeconomy around education that we have not considered. But it also inadvertently raises the cost to a parent, because now educating a child has become significantly more expensive because all of the electricity cost is yours to bear. You must get internet to put at home. You must get appropriate devices. Can you now have a household with 4 children and 1 device only for 4 children to use? There is that economic impact for parents who have just lost their economic power because the schools have closed and they sell next to the school. So there is that chain reaction impact that has increased. Have we assessed the health impact? Students are becoming more sedentary, staying at home, sitting behind a computer the entire day. When you're on a school compound, no child sits down the whole day on a school compound, especially the younger ones. They run, they walk. So we are looking for post-COVID that we could have an increase in non-communicable diseases, an increase in obesity, an increase in a number of health issues. And this is the education sector alone we're talking about and its impact that it is having as a result of moving into this digital platform. The weakness in all of this, however, is that it appears that many people think that this is a Ministry of Education issue only. But education has never been about the Ministry of Education and should always be considered about everybody's issue. So it's the chamber's problem. It's the manufacturer's problem. It's social transformation's problem. It's everybody's business, and they need to take that very hands-on approach that it is valuable to us to ensure that the education system functions and those safety nets are there as a result of any crisis that may or may not come within our environment. So this is something that we must consider. So what really are the opportunities that COVID has created? Because it has. One of the things that it has been able to do is that it gives us the opportunity to better equip our educators, to allow them to become more dynamic, more responsive, and more creative. Because to teach in a digital environment, you must be creative and responsive. You cannot simply translate the same traditional teaching modality and go into the digital platform. So it gives us that opportunity that even if you come out of the digital platform, then you still have a better teacher, a better educator as a result of them being more creative and more responsive to the needs. It allows us to create more independent learners so that our learners now learn to be able to help themselves a little bit more. Regardless of the environment you work in, this is an advantage, and we could see some advantages from that. It gives us the opportunity to develop diverse approaches to teaching and learning, which is something that we need. We've become very monotone in our teaching approaches, in the way that we deliver all the things that we have done. So COVID has given us that opportunity to become a lot more diverse in what it is that we do. It also gives us an opportunity to change the way that we actually deliver to our students. Do we need our students to be in 15, 16-week semesters and terms to learn? Is that necessarily the best way? Can we put them into shorter periods, condense work, have them focus on 2 or 3 courses at a time, and then move on? Or do we need to be teaching them 6 and 7 subjects at the same time for 15 weeks every single day and boggling their minds with all of this content all of the time? It gives us that opportunity to think about it. So the greatest opportunity I think it gives us is the opportunity to rethink, redesign, rediscover the art, fun, beauty, and value of education. But that redesign must be holistic, it must be energizing, and it must be inclusive. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. Mr. Sipal?
Thank you very much. Let me thank you and the team for inviting Ministry of Education, and more specifically Education District 1, for us to deliberate on the matter. All right, very interesting so far. I will, in the 3 minutes, present just a general overview of what we are looking at, and then further in the discussion, we are going to specifically move into certain areas. All right, so when we look at it from a general perspective, I was doing some research, and then the American Journal of Education states something which is very important, and let me read that to you. It says that productivity means producing more from the same level of input. Productivity goals become more important when the volume and range of outputs are expanding. And this is what we are facing now. And then now listen to something which is very important. And then I like that part very much. Okay, the article went on to say that based on the situation that you face, you have to attach to productivity efficiency. And listen to what it says here, which is what now COVID now has brought to our attention in education. Efficiency means spending less while producing the same or greater level of output. And this is what we are faced right now with the children. And then you must have heard Mr. Ragunanan explaining the concept of the stats where for this term there will be children who will be attending only 32% of the time they were supposed to be at school. All right, for example, last week where we had the Monday was a holiday, the Friday was Teacher Appreciation Week. There were some students who went to school only one day. So therefore now, along with productivity, efficiency comes in. Now that we have less days, and then probably we have less time with them, then the question is how can we increase the productivity level on a greater scale? And then now, here is now very important, in going through education on a wider scale, from Ministry of Education, the district level, and even parental involvement and other stakeholders who get involved. Listen to something which is very important there. It says that we have to have reciprocal accountability framework. Now this one is very important, reciprocal accountability framework. So therefore, the home will not be putting all the blame on the school will not be putting the blame on the community will not be putting the blame on the school, vice versa. So we all accept responsibility and accountability for education. So that's how we have to analyze it. Then it goes on to talk about educational planning, educational technology. And with this now, what it has brought to our attention in education, especially those of us who probably we are immigrant to the digital world, the digital natives, that's the children. This is their world. So we have been forced into teaching them in their sphere. And what we used to find happening is that we are trying to teach, let us say, those of us who have been in the system for 30 years, 20 years, or even 40 years, we are trying to teach the same method as was mentioned earlier to the children who are now natives to the digital world. So then we need to understand this very much. And then also we have to analyze a very important concept here. When you define education, do you define education as simply the acquisition of knowledge? Or do you define it together with the teacher? And listen to what an article says here. And then I will. It says a good or effective teacher is one who inspires hope. Hear this now, one who inspires hope. Okay, ignite imagination and instill a love of learning. This is what education brings. So I did not mention here anything about acquisition of knowledge. This is just one component of education. And if we understand education as a lifelong process, then all of these things will come into effect. So this is just my little intro.
Thank you, Mr. Sipal. Dr. Nurse?
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here. Many thanks to the Productivity Council for inviting me to participate. It's always a pleasure to talk about education and the education system, but particularly related to the issues of productivity and so on. One of the things I like to say when I'm discussing the education system is to make the distinction between schooling and education. I think there's an assumption that the two are related, when in fact what we are finding is that there's a major disjunction between the two. And in many respects, the model of schooling that we have in operation all across the world, so St. Lucia is not alone in this regard, is premised on a 19th century, particularly European construct of educating the masses, to go into the factory system, to work in bureaucracies, and the premise there was, in effect, you needed a knowledge worker, but not someone who was a critical thinker. And so what we have is an education system that's really premised on rote learning. And as my colleague indicated, it's about blackboards. It's about very formulaic understandings of the world. And in the Caribbean context and in many other developing countries, it's largely about replicating content from other cultures, because we do not produce our own educational content. It's largely an import industry. And so in many respects, the current model of education that we have in St. Lucia and all across the Caribbean is not the mechanism to generate productivity, and is not a mechanism to promote innovation, which productivity relies on. Productivity is not just a matter of people showing up for work. And especially in the current context, I think we're coming to recognize that. There's no shortage of firms that are now saying to us that their productivity has gone up as a result of people not coming to work. Because why? Because they operate in an ecosystem. People are spending 2 hours, sometimes 3 hours a day commuting. And at the workplace, what happens? We know that, for example, that staff spend more time looking at their WhatsApp messages, Facebook, and so on at the workplace than doing work. So they're on their machines, but they're actually doing social communication rather than actually working. There are some benefits to being in the workplace, social benefits, interaction, opportunity to brainstorm, and so on. But those things were actually not, in many workplaces, curated, except in a few firms. And similarly, within the education system, what we have is a framework whereby we have lots of teachers, lots of students, and operating in a very clearly defined box. Very little opportunities for cross-fertilization of ideas, very hierarchical structures. The teacher knows best, the student doesn't. They are there to just be passive receptors of knowledge. If a student challenges a teacher on a particular topic, that student can suffer in a significant way. And it's not just at the primary, tertiary, and secondary level, it also happens at the tertiary level. In many respects, the education system that we now have in place is not fit for purpose. I think if we could accept that, that is the most important consideration. And it's definitely not fit for purpose to generate resilience. If you look at the COVID context and all of the other forms of disaster risk that we are faced with, from climate change and other ecological disasters, our education system is premised on generating value that has very little relationship to our future resilience. And so if we take that as another critical element of the equation going forward, then we need to do not just a rethink, we actually have to unthink what we mean by education system, do some scenario planning as to what are our expected futures, and adjust accordingly. Make plans, make the required investments, and so on. So there is no magic bullet here. There's no quick fix. And just defining the challenge in relation to COVID is to misplace the real opportunity. The real opportunity that COVID offers us is to actually do a major process of undoing what we've been doing and creating a new potential structure for growth, where our education system can serve, yes, the social dimensions that my colleague has indicated, and rightfully so. People have come to recognize that the education system and the school plays a critical social role. But it's also that this is a major economic sector in the society. And so I'll end on that note for now. We can pick it up in the discussion period. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Nis. Okay, one of the points I've recognized has come up almost in everyone's presentation has been the idea of the use of technology. And I think it was Mr. Sipa that says that that is their world. So with this move now onto the blended learning approach, everything online, do we find that, let me start off with you, Ms. Samuel, was it easy for you, for students to make that shift, as everyone has considered this was your world, or did you find that move to that blended learning difficult?
Let me answer that. I found it very difficult considering it happened in such a short space of time, in such a fast space of time, and it would have been difficult for not only me, but what about the students that have disabilities, students that are raised in households with more than one child with the different levels of learning, and what about those students that did not have the technology to carry out these online classes? I see for myself that I was able to cope with it considering I had the resources, but we have to take into consideration that some of our students don't have the technology to carry out the task, the such transition. And I think that it was difficult for some, but people like me, I was able to grasp it, but I still found it difficult. And I wanted to make mention that in households where there are different age groups, different learning, different skills, that the parents, I encourage the parents to help and aid in all ways. They need the encouragement because the students, not every student in that household will compose of a device. What if they need to share devices? It would be difficult. So I'll just like to make mention that I was able to cope, but I want to take into consideration the students that would not. Yeah.
Thank you, Ms. Samuel. What about Ms. Richardson as a teacher? What was that experience like for you and your fellow teachers?
Yes, so I'm speaking from a teacher and student point of view. Student because I recently began my studies in the bachelor's primary program. And given that I am part of those who are into technology and I may be familiar with many of the apps and whatnot, it was still a challenge for me to get used to some of the modalities that we were introduced to, such as Moodle. It took a while for me to adapt to these things. Far as the children who are so little and the parents who are not really involved into technology. With my students and some of the students that I know, getting feedback from different teachers, the transition was very strenuous, it was difficult, not only for the students, for the teachers, for the parents, it was a big change. Some students did not have access, some parents were lackadaisical, they did not have the care. Some students basically did no work for the entire 5 months, and it was very apparent when they came to school. Those who were already at the ball of their game when they left their previous classes, they sustained some injuries. However, when school commenced and they began their routines and whatnot, they picked up gradually. But some students, it was really a big negative impact on them. Also, now that there's COVID, now that there's COVID, the students are not able to socialize with one another. It's more about staying in the classroom. And given a chance for us to play, it would have to be small groups, it would have to be structured, it would take more time, it would take more energy, it would be like a police at work. So being a teacher, you would have to be a police, you would have to be a nurse, you would have to be so many other different jobs while you're here trying to include the technology into your classroom. So given that in the event that COVID arises again, there's an increase in the cases and students have to stay at home, parents won't be used to you sending a notebook and paper. So we try to incorporate videos, we try to incorporate hands-on activities because the students got so used to doing different activities at home during the third term where it was only online virtual classes. We try to continue with those routines. Also, we were faced with situations where we would try to deliver information to the parents in the simplest terms. However, because it is not in their nature to teach, it was difficult for them to deliver the information to the students, to help them. It was a big challenge to them.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Mr. Harris, one of the things that has come up with them, as you mentioned, was a lot of the psychosocial elements, which seem to be a factor with this blended learning approach from a teacher and student perspective. Do you see any opportunities or you have any thoughts on what we can do now to strengthen on that and develop a more positive, experience for both?
Well, this is a huge challenge because it is, I think the COVID situation has just exposed it. I think if you look historically at St. Lucia, we have and we continue to have some very serious social issues that we have not dealt with as a nation. So listening to my colleague here saying that the parents were not interested to helping the children. The question that you have to ask is, could the parent even do the work the children were doing? And in a lot of cases, the parent is appearing disinterested because the parent does not want to show the child, I can't do the work that you're doing. So the parent is behaving badly because the parent is like, I can't read what you're doing there, so I'm going to behave. That's your problem. Because the parent is hiding from another social problem that the parent themselves has been suffering from. Hence the reason why I said that it is a bigger issue than the Ministry of Education per se. If we have to deal with these social issues, we have to look at all of those social issues, and they are very compounded by the economic issues. So there is no real quick fix on this, but the system really needs to be thought out again. You hear what the students and the teachers have said, that you hear some reports and it seems as if this period went through very smoothly. But if you're on the ground, you would know that it has been very, very difficult for teachers, students, and parents this period of going through this digital divide. Parents are suffering from the fact that they cannot afford the technology. They just don't have access to the technology. Sometimes they don't have the appropriate technology. This concept that you will do e-learning with a smartphone doesn't work. It doesn't work. It is extraordinarily uncomfortable to do the type of learning required with a smartphone. So it doesn't necessarily work with a tablet either. So what is the appropriate technology, and have we as an education system developed what the appropriate technologies are? And is there appropriate technology for different levels? Because the technology required for a child in primary school may not necessarily be what is at secondary school and not necessarily at college. A student who's doing an engineering program does not necessarily have the same technology that a student who's doing a business program. So when we talk about appropriate technology, it must be age specific, it must be content specific, and there are a number of things that we have to look at because we have not dealt with some of the other issues as it relates to how we deliver the education to the students, because but the students don't necessarily like to read on that digital platform that we spoke about. They play games. They don't even talk. Students will not be able to talk to their friends. What they read in very short. What is their world? And here we have older persons telling younger persons what their world is. And we had a young person on the panel saying, boy, that was so difficult for me. But the old people say, well, they're all right. That's how they like to learn. Is it? And I think this is where the problem is. We've never really had the conversation because it has always been driven by Eurocentric, North American-driven constructs of suburbia where people have more resources and more access to resources and not about all the great things that thou hast done and not really recognizing what our true social, economical situation is in St. Lucia and how is it that we are going to not adopt, but adapt the situation to our reality.
Thank you, sir. Talking about adapting, I know, Dr. Nurse, it's been an experience for Safa Lewis at the tertiary level. Was it, we were hearing from the primary that it was quite difficult. Did you face some of the issues that were mentioned, or was it a different process?
I think it's been challenging for everyone. I mean, I can't think of an educational institution where this has been a walk in the park. Far from it. But you know what it does expose is a number of vulnerabilities, as indicated by several of the panelists, and a lot of the social cleavages. So we already knew, even prior to COVID, that there's huge disjunctures in people's access to both devices and content. But I want to, get us to stick a pen. We talk about technology, but often what we're talking about is the hardware. When in fact, technology is about, it's about means of creating new ways of doing and being. And the software or the intellectual components that drive the devices is where we are underinvesting. And so if you look at the Caribbean and the data for the Caribbean in terms of our earnings from intellectual property, number of scholarly articles published in journals, I could go down the list. R&D expenditure per capita, etc. We have been underinvesting for a very long time, and with an expectation that we will do better in the future. So it's actually not premised on any hard evidence. So what we have is what my PhD supervisor used to call groundless optimism. We are optimistic about the future, but it's actually premised on no solid data, and it's not premised on any plan, and it's not premised on any investment. Mind you, like St. Lucia, I was looking at the data again last night. The education sector is a major source of government investment. The government of St. Lucia is spending close to 6 to 10% of the GDP, or even a more significant proportion of the government's budget on education. And it's the same thing across the whole Caribbean. But what are we getting out of that education system? What is the return on that investment? And how can it transform our societies? Well, our youth who are in the education system are more obese today than they were 10, 15, 20, 30 years ago. So they're not learning to be good athletes or to be athletic at school. They're not learning to think critically. They're not learning about the Caribbean, because if you ask them what's happening next door in the island that we could see from here, they don't know anything about it. They can't speak the language, so their language capabilities are weak. Mea culpa, I'm too much of an English speaker. So, and I could go on and on. And when you actually add up all of these key elements, we are not preparing our young people for a preferred future. What we're preparing them for, what I call looking in the rearview mirror. We're preparing them for a world that is already gone. So we're still thinking about how we could get them to be doctors and lawyers and engineers and so on, rather than being data scientists, about getting into the blue economy, green economy, digital economy, our educational system, and as well at the college, which is something we've had to push through. And I had to really work hard with my colleagues to get them to move away from the old framework which we've been running on for the last 20 or 30 years, when the world has moved. Right? So all the growth professions, all the new growth sectors in the global economy, we are not training those things here. Cybersecurity, cyber tech, fintech, med tech, I could go down the list. I did a stint at the OECD, which is the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development in Paris last year. And innovation is the key driver of productivity, and that's what we've been working with countries to help them to reconfigure the structure of their societies and the structure of their education system. Because without the educated population, you will not be able to take advantage of these opportunities that are emerging in the global economy. In many respects, we really don't have a choice, you know. It's either you get on the bandwagon and you move as fast as possible, or you fall aside. And most Caribbean countries are in the latter category because we are underinvesting, one. Two, the resources we are deploying are outdated and very resistant to change. So we are in a very perilous condition, and it has nothing to do with COVID. It has nothing to do with the technology. It has to do with how we see ourselves and how we see ourselves in the world. And if we see ourselves as passive receptors, so our kids are by and large downloaders. They're not uploading any content. Well, maybe they are uploading some content, but that's content that we don't necessarily want anyone to see. But the point is, unless we create a framework where our young people can move from being passive receptors of other people's knowledge and to become dynamic creators and generators of their own knowledge, our education system is not fit for purpose.
Thank you, Dr. Diz. Ms. Richardson, you wanted to make a comment? Mm-hmm.
Yes, I just wanted to add that the parental involvement, it was not only missing in terms of the lack of knowledge by the parents, but also being able to cope with your work life and having to come home and work with your child. It was very overbearing. I have a son myself, and to teach my students to try to reach them in all different ways to accommodate them, those who need that individual attention, because I did small groups to help reach out to them, to liaise with the parents, to educate the parents, doing the teletutorials, putting these PowerPoints together, and then to go home to my son to do work with him. It was a lot. I could not do it, and thankfully that he can handle himself. He's a thinker. If he doesn't know something, he would go on the internet, use the voice, find the words. He would push himself. Thankfully, I have a son who's like that. However, there are other students who may not be like that, and parents may come home not being able to assist their child, and the child would just be at a disadvantage.
Thank you, Miss. Mr. Sipal, as our educational leader, I'm going to ask you to comment now. Let me just let you know, our audience, that once he's done, we'll open the floor for your comments. So write down your questions, your comments. We're coming to you. Yes, Mr. Sipal.
Yes, so far, very healthy discussion. And then, taken from what Dr. Nurse was saying, let me reiterate the point here again with that of education and the teacher. Okay, it says here, to create or instill in the child a love of learning. This is the first thing that you must ensure that you do. So therefore, currently, we're faced with a problem in the education system where the schools, even the secondary schools, are giving us the report that the children, as you said, even though they have the technology, so the opportunity, yes, they have the technology, but now they are not making use of the technology. when they come back to school and then they have to do the revision, the teachers will ask how many of you went through the document, or then you did the information that was uploaded, did you go through it? Then you'll find a number of the children would say that they did not go through it. Now, what is the issue there? You see, we have to find out what the issue is, the underlying problem. So therefore, the love of learning, they have not understood the concept of education being a lifelong process. It's not just simply, you see, unless we don't divorce that idea of compartmentalizing education, then because some people take it to mean that I go to school for education and after school education is over, that's it. But then we need to instruct and instill in the students from young to understand that education is a lifelong process. And then when you analyze it also from a philosophical standpoint, all right, here is 4 questions that were asked. And then as Dr. Nurse said, that will bring into the discussion with the Ministry of Education. This is what we are going through right now. Listen what it says here. Number 1, what do we want students to learn? The bottom line. As St. Lucians, we are not looking at, and as the OECS, we are not looking at the American standard, the European standard, or the standard from Singapore, or whichever, Finland, or so on. But for St. Lucia, what is it? That's a question we have to ask, and then we have to come up with the answer. What do we want students to learn? Then number 2, how do we know if they have learned? That's what we have to ask ourselves. Then question number 3, what will we do if they don't learn? And that's where the gap is that we are trying to bridge that gap, and that's where we are falling short. I always say that, yes, you may have a school, you have 70% of your children that have done very well. What about the other 30%? What do we do with them? How do we reach them? How do we bridge that gap for this 30% of the children who are not meeting the standard? All right, and then remember, I'm not just simply talking about exam related. I'm talking about development for life. And then the 4th one is, what will we do if they already know it? So these are 4 questions which are very critical. And let me mention, just give me 30 more seconds. Okay, a very important point here. In terms of the technology, which is, as we said, this is an opportunity that has presented itself to us. But then we have to ask now, are we using the technology as a resource tool or as an instructional tool? Big difference. Most times we are using it as a resource tool. So you ask the children to go online, research that, and so on. That's a resource tool. But an instructional tool, that's why the Ministry of Education, we have taken on board the idea of the blended approach. And one component of the blended approach is the flipped classroom approach. So not just simply you have the 3 components of the blended approach, and under the first component you have about 4 other components, and one of it is the flipped classroom approach. Now here what must happen? The teachers now need to come together and then upload the instruction or the different modalities that they will use in terms of the lesson. Then the children, and hear this now, with the flipped classroom approach, it will give the child a number of advantages. 1, creativity. 2, differentiation. 3, the lesson will be at their pace. And 4, the time that they feel that they can learn best. So if it is at 9 o'clock or 8 o'clock in the night, or okay, let me not exaggerate it, but 6 o'clock or 7 o'clock in the morning, they feel best that they can absorb that information. Then they click on, and then the lesson is there. Then if they realize that they have not understood, they pause. They go on, and for the boys, go outside for 5 minutes, play a little cricket, then come back, press again. The lesson continues. That's what the flipped classroom blended approach is all about. And then now for that to be effective, here what is very important, we have to totally eliminate professional isolation. Totally eliminate that. Because you know what happens? This is my school, we want to be top on the island. So we are doing everything within our sphere. And then that other school is in the same district, but they have been suffering for the past 5 years, 10 years. So here the opportunity here. This is the moment now for all schools, whether you decide all large schools, all small schools, or in geographic location based on what the environment that they are serving. You come together and then you prepare these educational programs. And then now, one school will decide we are doing it on fraction, one school will decide we're doing it on the health science, one school will do it on different things, one school will do it on physical education, and so on. And then you upload that. Every school is getting that. So that one teacher now does not have to go and prepare everything. And then now we're talking about productivity. So then that's where productivity comes in, when we collaborate and we totally eliminate, as I said, professional isolation. So at Ministry of Education, we are ready to work with our stakeholders, we are ready to work with the teachers, and then we are ready to move the children forward into education.
Thank you, Mr. Sipal. Now, as said, we are opening up to the audience. Do we have any questions? Again, please remember to go to the mic. Don't all go at once. I'm sure we have some questions.
And yeah, to myself, but I deal with visually impaired students. I deal with visually impaired students, and even before COVID, we had limitations when it comes to special education. And now with COVID, we're really seeing the gap from how our system can inculcate special education students. And being an education practitioner, it was very challenging for me because I felt like I didn't have the support of behind my back, because it felt like I really had to. When you're a special educator, you have to constantly think outside the box. You need to be innovative. But with COVID, it really felt like I was on my own. What methods are in place to better facilitate those who we deem as special education students? Because I don't like to refer to my students as special ed students. I believe that they're just not at the level that we deem as a society to be, acceptable. What methods have the ministry put in place across the board, especially you, Mr. Sipal, and you, Mr. Keith Nurse, because we have students, our students need to go to SARTA as well, and they would like to go to university as well. What methods are in place due to COVID, or what gaps have you noticed when it comes to such? And the other thing as well is that I realize that it has been proven that online learning is very effective. But what initiatives are there in the short term, and what are some of the significant lessons that we have learned thus far? And my third question, just three questions.
Okay, so let's
just break it down.
Let's break it down.
we
So
can
let's
address
start off with the
one.
first. Yes. Okay, so you've mentioned that you'd like to go first? Okay, and then we'll come to you, Dr. Nis.
Okay, yes, I do understand what you are saying. And then at the ministry level, last week we had a meeting with education officers and other heads of department at the Ministry of Education, and then this was one of the major items up for discussion. And I must tell you, your education officer, Mr. Dale Saint-Gis, yes, he continues to bring forward that idea. And then also, you made a very good point there. There are children probably with a special need at a particular time, but then they are not branded as just special needs children. And then what has happened is that the OECS right now, there is a program that will be rolled out, and it's under the GPE education program, where special education unit will be receiving a large portion of that amount of money. So Mr. Dale Saint-Gis will be meeting with all the schools and the principals and the directors of these schools to bring to you all the plans that we have for special needs. So indeed, your call is being heard.
Thank you, Mr. Sipal. Dr. Nurse, do you have anything to add?
Yes. Let's give a personal example. I'm one of the adjunct faculty at the School of Business in Trinidad and Tobago, and the Arthur Lockjack School of Business. And 2 years ago, I was asked to teach a class that included a visually impaired student. Of course, this is an MBA class, so they're adults. And the school put on special software on my computer so that the student can access the content, and that student topped the class of 20. Why? Probably because she worked a bit harder and than her colleagues, because those who are sighted take for granted their sightedness. And in fact, so sightedness may actually be a disability. So it depends on the paradigmatic framework that you use. And often what we do is by labeling people and putting them into a box, we create a lower set of expectations. But that experience really taught me, and it taught the members of the class that you must be careful what you take for granted. But you also have to have the tools, which I think is the point that you're making. So, but it also says that, whatever educational systems we have in place, they have to be responsive to the needs. It has to be operating not on a one-size-fits-all framework, but one that is clearly, demand-driven as opposed to supply-driven. But most of our institutions in government and in other entities are actually supply-driven. And in fact, the needs of the client are secondary to the needs of the people who work in the institution. All right? And so they become self-referential rather than responsive or adaptive to the needs for the clients and the stakeholders that they were set up for. And so there's also that particular dynamic that we need to take into account in terms of governance structures. So, but it's a really important issue to grapple with. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Nurse. Any other panelists would like to make a comment? No, we're good? Okay. Can you continue, please?
Okay, and my final question would be, since social distancing is the new normal, how effective is the current rotational system? And is there a plan to increase contact time while keeping students safe?
Okay, I see. Mr. Sipal is ready for that one. Yes, Mr. Sipal.
Yes, as we speak, Ministry of Education again last week, we met. Then, as I told you, we have the stats to show that the rotation system is not the best. Okay, but then with the condition that we face, then we have to make it work. However, it is not the best. Okay, and then we are looking at, because there is right now the document that we received from World Health Organization, which is stating that if there is no community spread, then the school can revert back to normal with everybody just simply wearing their mask. Okay, so then that was up for discussion already. We had already met with the union principals associations. So we were just about this week to roll it out with the final set of meeting, and then for us to start it off next week. However, we have the latest thing because, as you said, COVID is very fluid. So now we have to wait to see what is happening now with this current case we have. If it is a community base, then based on the locality of it, then we may have to differentiate the way we will implement the whole school approach. But if everything remains safe in St. Lucia and we have no community spread, then as of next week, we are doing it based on the readiness of the schools, then a lot of schools will be back to normal.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. I would just like to say my name is Brianna Edward, and I'm representing the Demplet Louise Primary School. I would just like to ask a brief question. When will we reopen? All I want to say is because everyone has their after-school activities. Some people do lessons, some people play tennis, some people play football, some people do gymnastics, dance, and etc. So I'd just like to ask, when will we reopen?
Thank you, Miss.
Okay, let me tell you, this is a very profound question, all right, very deep, all right, and then you thought about it very well, okay, and then also, as was mentioned earlier, if we really consider what school is not, and then I said it is not simply a place where you come to get information, all right, it is developing the holistic child, and the after-school program is crucial, because especially where you have parents who may be working late, all right, and then rather than the children just go home and then with nothing to do, then you have schools with organized after-school program. And then I know for your school especially, it is well structured, well organized. So this is what is happening. The Ministry of Education is looking at it closely, that based on the availability and the structure in which the school has adopted, then we are going to allow it to happen. So come very soon, you're going to be back with your gymnastics or whichever one, your karate, whichever one that you do.
Thank you. I'll be looking forward to it.
All right, you're welcome.
Thank you very much. Any other questions? Yes, miss?
Morning. Good morning, everyone. My name is Cyrilia Lewis, and I work with the Ministry of Education. I know that COVID has really opened our eyes to many things. Many gaps, many opportunities to exist despite COVID. But we need to look at COVID as, as something that came, want to challenge us, but we are going to work around him because we must survive. The Ministry of Education has the school feeding program, and it would link directly to what Mr. Harris mentioned. Many students come to school and they depend on that program for their meals. I know about it very well. They depend on that program for their meals. Now, if they were at home, if they stayed at home, they wouldn't get much food. So when they come to school, they get to share. And even with the after-school program, they still get a meal. So it means that the child is well fed. At least the parent can rely on that opportunity for the child to get food. Now, based on what is happening around the world, it means that our buying power for food, our importation bill would increase. And would we get the opportunities to buy what we really want to buy in terms of food and the quality of food? Here I see opportunities for farmers in St. Lucia and schools in St. Lucia to develop their own school gardens. There were programs like that already. These need to be continued. These need to be strengthened so that the schools can get supplies from their own gardens to feed their own their students. Also, opportunities for farmers on the outside where, you know, they can sustain the market. They can get economic value for what they bring out there. We must try to think hard and deep to feed ourselves, to be able to produce food for ourselves. We have a lot of food in St. Lucia, a lot of fruits in St. Lucia, and they're seasonal. I know the Ministry of Agriculture has been working very, very hard in terms of forecasting with farmers and trying to program the planting seasons and so on. I think we really need to organize what we do in terms of food production so that we really can sustain ourselves, sustain our country, sustain our schools, and try our best not to depend too heavily on foreign food coming in. You know, that can save us quite a bit. So, Mr. Sipal, I know that you know me very well. I just want to encourage the various school districts to continue trying their best to bring in agriculture in one way or the other, small, into the schools. If you have land, you create your school garden so that they can learn that kind of thing. If we don't have land, we can containerize gardens. We have other forms of agriculture. Aquaculture, we have it, and it's just time for us to really open our eyes and start to do what we should do to help ourselves. Thank you.
Thank you, Miss. Any of the panelists would like to add to? Yes, Dr. Nurse.
Thank you. I know I'm being a bit disruptive by saying some things, but for example, the young lady, you know, she made a really important comment about the schools, but she used the word after school activities. All right, so I have some German friends of mine who went to school, and only half the day did they spend in class. The rest of the time at school, they spent doing other things, like sports, like working in a garden, and so on. And all of that was school. It wasn't after school. All right? So the paradigmatic frameworks that we use are premise. We make a link. We think education is schooling, and being in the classroom is schooling. When in fact, being in the classroom is possibly the least best way for our children to learn. Because we know from the research on the learning experience and the knowledge experience that people only retain 25% of what they hear. They learn about 50–60% of what they read. But they learn 80–90% of what they write. And they learn probably 100% of what they do. So, having a teacher in a classroom providing basic instruction to students will give you a 25, possibly 30% return, and that's for a good teacher. So, the discussion that we are having is premised on a paradigmatic understanding of what is the education system, what is schooling, what is the classroom, and what is learning. These are very outdated structures. That's the point I'm trying to get across in every one of my interventions. So, if we want an enhanced education system, we need to be unthinking all of these things. The other thing is we are still thinking purely about children. What about people in the workplace, right? Every major enterprise or business has to educate their workers because the modes of operation are changing and changing very rapidly. It's not just about the technology, it's also about the needs of the clients. All right? So that, 20 years ago, you had a customer, you treated that customer in a particular way. Today, you can't treat that customer in the same way because they are on social media. So every time they consume your product, they can provide a feedback almost immediately. So it means then that the way in which you interface with the consumer or the customer has to change. And so, in that respect, we are running with a model that is still very outdated. So that's why our young people are coming out into the world ill-equipped for the future. And in that respect, we really need to do a revamp, a major reconfiguration, and use the COVID and coexisting with COVID as the opportunity to make these changes, right? This is the silver lining in the dark cloud. If we allow this so-called crisis to go away and for us to revert to the good old days of the face-to-face classroom, right? Because now we're looking at it with rose-tinted glasses. But I'm saying to you that it wasn't fit for purpose in the first instance. Let us not fool ourselves, all right? And if we accept that, then it creates a pathway for us to do the transformation. Otherwise, we are going to be handicapped by our limited understanding of how weak and how ineffective our dominant traditional paradigm was. So for example, do we need to have 20 math teachers all teaching the same thing? The answer is no. We need one good math teacher. We now need a number of people who are doing instructional design, creating the content, creating the frameworks for leveraging that content online, in face-to-face context, etc., etc. You now need a division of labor. And that is the new framework that is being thrust upon us, as opposed to thinking that, well, we have no COVID in St. Lucia, so we could go back to face-to-face. If we did that, we would have squandered the opportunities presented by COVID. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Nurse. Okay, now I see you and I've heard some chatter here, so let's go to Miss Samuel first and then we'll come back to you, Miss.
Yes. I just wanted to make a comment on behalf of the youth. I just wanted to say that I know that these after-school programs are very crucial to our youth. They're the foundation to some of them because not all students are academically inclined. Some students are able to be more physical and take action in sporting, other activities outside of academics. And I believe that it has really impacted some of the youth, and I know that a lot of our youth have a lot of potential in the sporting, and you see that a lot of students excel in sporting activities and they are suffering. And I know that you said that you missing your after school activities, and I just wanted to say that some students are really missing it, and you can tell.
Thank you. Yes, Ms. Richardson.
I have much to say. I don't know where to start. So I'm going to start off with they were talking about education is for life and about students going home to research. Well, with me, I could speak for myself, and I know there are many others who are like me. We know what we have now, and we have to be creative, innovative, and use what we have now. When sending the students home, especially in 2020, sending them home to do research, we won't say, okay, what is a mammal? Go home and find out what is a mammal. You have to be creative in the way that you send the students home to find out a message. It could be through a popular song, it could be even Denry segment. You have to be creative to get those students to get that information in a fun way to say, hey, school is not only about a mammal is, and yeah, you just have to be creative in the different strategies you use for the students to bring out their ideas, for the students to get information, for the students to show their abilities to do things that you, the teacher, cannot even do. The next thing I would like to speak on is the special ed program. We say that we have a special ed program, yes. We have many students in classes, especially the numbers we have in our classes in St. Lucia, who suffer tremendously, who needs that one-on-one attention. And I was speaking with a teacher, and he says at their school, there are assistants, they alter exams to suit those special education students. There are aids. There are so many benefits for these students, and I just wish it would be throughout St. Lucia. So these students won't feel like, I don't want to come to school. These students would grow. These students could reach somewhere far in life. Another thing that I would like to speak about is, well, yeah, close to the special education is not only the special education students, it's also the students in a classroom. Like Dr. Nurse was saying, we need to unthink our education system here in St. Lucia. I find that we rely too much on books, pens, and testing. The students we do not see the true potential of the students because they come to school and we want to drill into them what we're supposed to teach them following the curriculum. However, let's say we were to be more hands-on, get the students to show their potential in a classroom. When these students do leave primary school, secondary school, when it comes to obtaining a job, there's a difficulty because these students who may not be academically inclined, however, they are knowledgeable in different aspects of life, whether it be mechanics, because there are people who have never gone to school and they can fix a car. When it comes to getting a job, they suffer. They have to go out into the streets, go into gangs and whatnot. I find we need to unthink and we need to build the students at the same time, provide opportunities for them when they do leave school.
Yes, go ahead, yes.
You see the term academically inclined? I want us to banish that from our thoughts. Please. You cannot be a mechanic and not know the theory behind. My colleague could explain to you, right? All right? You cannot be an athlete today and not know about data because it's all data driven. All right? You have to be able to know whether you're running your mile at Olympic rate pace or not. All right? And I could go on and on and on. Whether you are an artist, you have to know how to conceptualize the world in utilizing not only the technology, but understanding what other people are doing in the world. There is no distinction between this notion of academics and something else. Those are outdated constructs. And so I am trying to suggest that there's a way in which we need to really do this thing differently. And so the opportunity is with us. Let us seize it. Let us really break out of the confines that we have created for ourselves. Some of it is historical and imported and received, but then we have then taken that and built additional walls that lock us in to these frameworks. So for example, I mean, there's a primary school in Barbie, that's one of the top ones. The first thing they do in the morning is they get the boys to run. They have to run, swim, play football. That's the first thing they do in the morning. Why? They're boys. All right, so they get them to settle down after that because they burnt out all the energy and they sit down in the classroom and they are far more effective. Whereas in the traditional framework, we think that this should be an after-school activity. They have a garden at the back of the school and they are required to spend X amount of hours at it. All right, so all I'm saying is that what we now have is not even close to what we can do and do well. The art of the possible is within our capabilities. We just need to stop thinking that what we now have is the best that we can be. It's far from it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Nurse. Mr. Harris?
I try to always avoid the academically inclined argument because if I have to go by that notion, then I'm one of the dumbest guys in the room because I'm not academically inclined. So I've long avoided that argument because I get a little bit too passionate about it, especially when they refer directly after saying academically inclined to somebody who is a mechanic or somebody who's technical. And I always say, boy, those academically inclined people are allowing people who have no concept of academics to fix their car and then they go and drive it. I mean, who does that? And build your house, and because now when they're too bright, so I didn't build my house for $1 million because it's dumb, I try to avoid that argument. But the question that I have though is, and I heard the comment, if they don't learn, what if they don't want to learn what you are teaching? What determines that the person is not learning? I'm in a classroom and this person is in front of me telling me about Shakespeare. I don't know what Shakespeare. I don't care for Shakespeare. You come in and you want to tell me about these fractions in this form. I don't care about fractions. And you telling me I ain't learning. But I'm outside there and I can take this beat machine and make a whole bunch of beats. You tell me I ain't learning. I ain't learning. But you are going to give me an F. Tell me I'm not academically inclined and put me on your standardized test of minimum standards. And you tell me I'm not learning and I'm special ed. But as the failure in the construct that we need to rethink and redesign, because we are sitting here in our minds determining for every single person whether or not they are learning what we sit in our ivory towers and determine as necessary conditions for survival in this world. How many of the top persons in our classes are millionaires? How many of the top persons who first in common entrance who were first at CXC, who were first when they went to school on the morning, and are first at making money. They're not. They're generally working for the not academically inclined person who hiring them to work for him. So who learning? So the first thing we have to change is that what really is learning and what is somebody learning or not. So that's the question that I'm throwing out there, because if we are going to rethink this process, the first rethink is not in the student or the learner, it's in the administrators who still rethink what they think about what the education is. They just think that they're going to move it from a chalk and talk to a blue light, and they solve their problem because they have little fancy video games and to do the same thing differently. So the challenge really is to rethink.
Thank you, Mr. Harris. Mr. Sipal.
Yes, discussion like that gets me excited. All right, so the question again, what is it that student must learn? Okay, and then I like the discussion very much. All right, and then we have to be deliberate in trying to change the whole concept of the mindset to get persons to understand that education, again, I am saying, is not acquisition of knowledge. Okay, by this, if we can reach to that point, and then now with the opportunities that have been created with COVID, and then we can see our gaps, because as we said, we have a number of students from secondary schools. For example, about 2 years ago, I went to address a graduation ceremony. There were 50 students graduating. I asked the question, how many started in Form 1? 100. 100 started in Form 1. 5 years later, 50 of them are graduating. So the education system, we fail them. We fail them. And then I will say this, from Ministry of Education, I'm not going to pacify it. We have been failing a lot of the children along the way. And if we don't reach the point now for us to understand, we need to change the system. And I like what Mr. Harris said. It's not just simply changing the modality, but change the entire construct of education. All right? Then by the time we reach to that point and we can do it, so therefore, a child who has the interest to be a mechanic or to be a fisherman and so on, there is a program in place to prepare that child for this career. Not just everybody doing 5 or 10 CXCs and at the end of, or CSEC, and at the end of the day, you are not prepared for the job market. So we need to understand this. And then a very important point that will come in there also is for us to understand that we cannot associate the child's chronological age with their readiness level. So it is not that everybody who is at 10 years old should be at that grade level and doing that amount of work. If we understand very well, if we are teaching children for life, we are teaching them for life. This is what life is. A child should never reach grade 5 or grade 6 and they have not mastered the basic prerequisites of numeracy and literacy, because these are the foundation for life. So that's why it is said that at the infant school, the child will learn to read. Then when they leave infant department, they read to learn. But then if it's just like you're building a house. If you don't have a solid foundation, how can you build the rest of the house? It will collapse. So by the time you have some basic standards that you expect children to reach, so then they'll be able to access everything else. So they want to be a ballet dancer, they want to be a cricketer, they want to be this, they want to be that, but you have the basic standards set that at their readiness level, that's the important point, at their readiness level, they will be able to acquire that and then be ready to move on. And then I know you are passionate about it because you are the theater art specialist, all right? And then now, during the rotation period, and schools had to cut on some of the subjects. What do you think the schools cut on? Okay, so some schools, no PE, some schools, no music, some schools, no theater arts, some schools, no this. Not understanding that education is holistic for the child. It's not the idea of the grammar type education that we had the construct of before. So it's not just simply you sit there and then you learn all the semantics and the syntactics of the language. So by the time you open your mouth, you speak, people will say, oh yeah, Mr. Sipal is good. No. So we need to understand from today. So COVID has presented the opportunity for us And when I go back to the Ministry of Education, I'm going to continue the discussion on that we have to seriously restructure the concept of education.
Thank you, Mr. Sipa. We have a comment from our audience.
Good morning. Mercury Transmodest, Education Officer at the National Enrichment and Learning Unit. I speak to the adult learner. I speak of the parents, for example, Ms. spoke about. I too am a parent. I am an adult education officer by profession. I speak to those parents who are in the system, who have been given the opportunity but do not even have the knowledge. The children were sent home, their parents are at home, or they may have lost their job. These adult learners, these are the very, very same learners that Mr. Sipan spoke about, that maybe the education system failed them. They dropped out of school. They will definitely not have the knowledge nor the ability to deal with the children that that they've been sent home to do that online learning, if we want to call it online learning or if we want to call it remote learning. I also speak to the structure of the online classes, the so-called online classes we're talking about, because if there is no structure with it, then our students will not have any idea as to what to do, because they will find themselves as thinking, oh, okay, this is haphazard. My teacher will just be sending, just like Mr. Harris said, we have the same methods, just being pushed into a different mode. That cannot happen. It will not work if we push it that way. These adult learners we are talking about, I want us to think of the opportunity that COVID presents. We want to use COVID as not forgetting about or using parental involvement as one of the key parts of our learning system. Let us use COVID to bring our parents closer to us, involve our parents in the education system as a whole. If you found that there's a parent who maybe is lacking, maybe the academics, the literacy and numeracy, maybe the technological part of it, there are parts of the Ministry of Education, for example, NELU, that can deal with that. So this is a time for us to collaborate, not decompartmentalize what Mr. Sipal said. Let us put it together. We have different parts of the education system that speak to different parts of what we experience in the different deficiencies that we experienced during COVID and even now. So I would encourage us as a whole. We are as strong as our weakest link. And if one of our weakest links is the parents that Mr. was speaking about, then let us deal with it. Maybe, and we all know that if we encourage our parents to participate in adult education as a whole, our children too will realize that, oh, my parent is doing something, him or herself. I too can be more involved in my schoolwork. That works. I've seen it happen, and let us just tap into that opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Now we seem to have a consensus across the board here that it might be time for a reset of the education system. Now, as we come to the close of our discussion, I invite the various panelists to give their final thoughts on the theme. Let me say it again. It is the education system, gaps, weaknesses, opportunities during and post-COVID-19. And keeping in mind the theme of the week, building resilience through collective action, reset, rethink, innovate. Miss, we will start with you. We'll go this way. Yes? Okay.
I'll go first.
Okay, then.
It was interesting to hear the last comments. I have 2 teenagers, and I look at their work occasionally, and I can't help them. what our young people are learning at school, I didn't learn at school. And rightly so. Society should advance. And so, what we're talking about in terms of the parents being part of that ecosystem you described is not as much about the parent being a co-teacher as much as a facilitator of the learning experience, being a support structure, etc., etc. And that, I think, there is an opportunity for us to make some strategic investments. But the key thing, and this is something that I've come to understand as a result of being involved in a workshop more than 20 years ago, actually, about the different learning structures in different parts of the world. And the North American, European structure that we've inherited is premised on a notion that the learning is somehow the responsibility of the teachers and the education system. And in some societies, particularly in some of the more competitive Asian economies now, they operate on the premise that learning is the responsibility of the child, the teacher, the parent, and everyone. Like, learning is this, as we talk about it, lifelong, but often we say that glibly, when in fact what it means is that we are all learners. You are a learner from the time you are born, and it will never end. But what are you learning for? What is its purpose? How do you relate that to your everyday and to your future? And those become the critical questions. And so the notion that we have something in isolation called the education system that you matriculate out of, graduate from, and so on, even the terminologies we use suggest that we still define it as an experience within a box, when in fact it has to be a lifelong process. So I'll end on that note and thank the organizers. Really, education is critical, and having learners that can think for themselves is a critical element of the resilience element of our societies. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Nurse. Okay, Mr. Harris.
In closing, I would just like to state that the education system is a true reflection of the society. Who we are as a people reflects on our education system. When you listen to the stories of the past, of persons going to school without shoes and patch and using slate, there was a concerted effort by the entire society to ensure that persons learned. Today, we have divorced ourselves as it just been an individual responsibility, and nobody else is worried about the learning of whoever is in that environment. So as a society, we need to realize that the education of anyone is all of our business. We all need to participate in that learning process, and that the learning process is not simply left to schools or someone who is in school. I had a discussion with someone some time ago, and that person was doing their PhD study, and they said that they noted that the persons who are the worst learners are teachers, because teachers think they know everything. And the best learners are actually persons in tech, because they always have a problem and they always have to figure out how they're going to solve that problem. And that is part of the problem that we have with our system, that persons who tend to be educators or call themselves educators tend to be very difficult to learning new ways and different ways of doing things, because they're supposedly already the experts. But we need to flip that and make them recognize that the education system and education is similar to tech. Every day there's a new problem, and we need to be thinking about new ways to help solve those problems. And every student is a technological marvel that we need to see how we can resolve to get that marvel to reveal itself. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So we move on to you. Can we make it as, I'm seeing the signals that we are almost out of time, so let's be wary of that.
The National Students' Council is an advocate, a voice, and we govern the students. We listen to the students' needs and we are representative. I'd like to highlight a weakness. On October 10th, it was Mental Health Day. Our mental health is crucial. The way we think, the way we behave, it makes us who we are. And I would like to say this is an opportunity for the coordination between school counselors and community leaders to connect with students for psychological support. It is very necessary. In order to maintain mental wellness, I believe time should be taken to do things that our students are passionate about. But due to this virus, students are being strained. They are not getting the opportunity to do what makes them feel good. And this is affecting their mental health. How are our students supposed to perform and interact in these e-learning classrooms when they aren't able to concentrate and focus? So I just wanted to make mention of that. And also, we emphasize on teachers being taught to deal with e-learning, but have we placed emphasis on our parents, the parents being taught how to teach their children how to operate these devices? Because I know a lot of parents don't know how to operate this device, and how are their children supposed to know when they don't know? So I just wanted to leave on that note. Thank you.
Thank you, Miss. Mr. Sipa.
Okay, and with the 30 seconds I have left, let me once again thank you for allowing us, Ministry of Education, to be here. And I have jotted quite a few points that when we go back to our planning meeting, we will take into consideration. And let me guarantee you that we will continue to ensure that all students learn. And learning, remember, it is not the acquisition of knowledge. And then with this, continue to send your points of view to the Ministry of Education. We will work together to ensure that every child, we don't have academically and non-academically, every child will learn. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Richardson, sorry.
As we end, I don't really have much to say, but I would just like to encourage teachers to continue to be innovative in whatever aspect it may be, to keep to help the students to want to learn, to do it in creative ways that they will learn, even when they are unaware of it. I would like to encourage the parents to be positive, not just put all the strain on the teachers as they saw for themselves throughout the past 5 months, that it's not just us teaching the students, it's giving them the care, the attention, to be patient with those students, because I got a lot of complaints about parents not being patient to their children and giving up on them, finding different ways that they can understand something. I just want to encourage everybody out there to be there for the children, because they are our future.
Thank you very much. And on behalf of the organizers, I would like to thank our panelists for taking time to be here, and of course you, our audience, here with us and virtually. My name is Kentilia Louis, and it has been my pleasure being your moderator this morning. Enjoy the rest of your day.
COVID-19 has been disastrous for our economy and our productivity.
But it has caused us to reset, rethink, and innovate.
Productivity Awareness Week 2020 will focus on building collective resilience in tourism, infrastructure, and the financial sector.
Rethink our approach to the agriculture, manufacturing, and the health sector.
It calls for innovation in education and taking advantage of opportunities in the digital economy.
Telework for greater resilience and productivity.
Join the discussions during Productivity Awareness Week from October 12th to the 16th.
Under the theme, Building Resilience Through Collective Action.
Reset, rethink,
innovate.
Join the discussions live on Facebook at St. Lucia, NCPC, the National Competitiveness and Productivity Council, embracing excellence.